Ruslan.
I've been covering a series on this channel about addiction, dealing with my own addiction, overcoming addiction, sexual urges. I'm actually going to create a playlist below for the entire series, everything I've ever said about it. I think it's very timely. I think as someone that has addiction that I've conquered, someone that has family members that are addicted on wilding out, and someone that knows a lot of folks who watch this channel deal with addiction on some level or another. Maybe it's just that sugar addiction you can't get rid of. Maybe you're a dude and you're struggling with porn. Maybe it's something way bigger than that. Maybe it's hard drugs. I think this series, the content we've been covering on this series, is gonna help you guys a lot. And this video is gonna get to the root of it. The video before this deals really from a scriptural standpoint. We go over Romans 7. We cover a lot of passage. This video is going to be more from an academic standpoint, going over this TED Talk video, one of my favorite TED Talk videos that explores this idea of addiction. It's called Everything You Think You Know About Addiction Is Wrong. This video, the thumbnail says Christians versus Addiction, because, well, to be quite honest with you, I think we've just completely gotten it wrong, and I'm gonna get very specific here about what we've gotten it wrong and what some of us continue to get it wrong on. This is by Joanne Harry, I think that's how you pronounce his name. This is from 2015. This video helped me a lot in discovering my own addiction patterns and how to help those, as well as giving me the tools to have compassion, have sympathy, and empathy for folks in my life that are dealing with addiction. Hey, by the way, 51% of the people who watch this channel are not subscribed. So if you could do me a solid, click out of this video, hit that subscribe button for your guy. That would really help a lot. And make sure the bell notification's on. And while you're down there, make sure you give this video a thumbs up for your guy. All right? And so I'm gonna play you guys 4 different clips. I'll stop and comment. Say, conclusion of this, you guys aren't gonna like. Some of you guys won't like. Okay, but I'm gonna give you guys a nice verse passage to glue this all together. All right? So let's just jump right in. Here.
Think we know what I thought I know, right? Just think about this middle row here, right? Imagine all of you for 20 days now went off and used heroin 3 times a day. Some of you look a little bit more enthusiastic than others at this prospect.
So he talks about, imagine if everyone just went and used heroin in the audience, or this middle row uses heroin in the audience. And think about your predisposition. If you were to just go do heroin for 90 days straight or 30 days straight, right? Think about what your preconceived bias is on how that's gonna play out, and watch how he breaks it down from a scientific standpoint.
Don't worry, it's just a thought experiment. Imagine you did that, right? What would happen? Now, we have a story about what would happen that we've been told for a century. We think because there are chemical hooks in heroin, as you took it for a while, your body would become dependent on those hooks, you'd start to physically need them, and at the end of those 20 days, you'd all be heroin addicts, right?
That's kind of what we've been taught, right? There's certain drugs, you just take a hit, and then you instantly an addict, right? Now listen to the rest of this.
That's what I thought. First thing that alerted me to the fact something not right with this story is when it was explained to me, if I step out of this TED Talk today and I get hit by a car and I break my hip, I'll be taken to hospital and I'll be given loads of diamorphine. Diamorphine is heroin. It's actually much better heroin than you're ever going to buy on the streets, because the stuff you buy from a drug dealer is contaminated, actually very little of it is heroin, whereas the stuff you get from the doctor is medically pure. And you'll be given it for quite a long period of time. There are loads of people in this room who may not realize that you've taken quite a lot of heroin, right? And anyone watching this anywhere in the world, this is happening. And if what we believe about addiction is right, those people are exposed to all those chemical hooks. What should happen? They should become addicts. This has been studied really carefully. It doesn't happen. You will have noticed if your grandmother had a hip replacement, she didn't come out as a junkie.
So he's saying, hey, if it was all about the chemical side of addiction, strictly chemical, then everyone who goes in and has surgery, everyone who has a hip replacement, everyone who has something traumatic, everyone would be addicted if it was strictly about the chemical side. But he's gonna go in deeper here in a second. And many do get addicted, but it's for a different reason. The opioid crisis, for a different reason.
It just seems so weird to me, so contrary to everything I'd been told, everything I thought I knew. I just thought it couldn't be right. Until I went and met a man called Bruce Alexander, who's a professor of psychology in Vancouver, who carried out an incredible experiment that I think really helps us to understand this issue. Professor Alexander explained to me, the idea of addiction we've all got in our heads, that story, comes partly from a series of experiments that were done earlier in the 20th century They're really simple experiments. You can do them tonight when you go home if you feel a little bit sadistic. You get a rat and you put it in a cage, and you give it 2 water bottles. One is just water, and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drugged water and almost always kill itself quite quickly. So there you go, right? That's how we think it works. In the 70s, Professor Alexander comes along and he looks at this experiment and he noticed something. He said, we're putting the rat in an empty cage. It's got nothing to do except use these drugs. Let's try something a bit different. So Professor Alexander built a cage that he called Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats, right?
You guys follow along? The way they would do it is that the rat would be isolated, and then over time, it would destroy itself from doing the drug. Now, he says, they reworked the experiment, and they put the rat in this place called Rat Park.
They've got loads of cheese, they've got loads of colored balls, they've got loads of tunnels. Crucially, they've got loads of friends, they can have loads of sex, and they've got both the water bottles, the normal water and the drugged water. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, they don't like the drugged water. They almost never use it. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. You go from almost 100% overdose when they're isolated to 0% overdose when they have happy and connected lives.
Don't miss it! The rats who can choose water or heroin water when they're isolated are what? They keep drinking the heroin water and they overdose. However, when they're in Rat Park and they have friends and stuff to do and all these other things, they almost never continue drinking the heroin water and they almost never isolate. They just choose the regular water.
But fortunately, there was a human experiment into the exact same principle happening at the exact same time. It was called the Vietnam War.
Listen up.
In Vietnam, 20% of all American troops were using loads of heroin. And
20%! 20% of freaking soldiers in Vietnam were using heroin. A lot of you guys didn't know that.
If you look at the news reports from the time, they were really worried because they thought, my God, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war ends. It made total sense. Now, those soldiers who were using loads of heroin were followed home. The Archives of General Psychiatry did a really detailed study, and what happened to them? It turns out they didn't go to rehab. They didn't go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped. Now, if you believe the story...
95% of these soldiers that did drugs in Vietnam, did heroin. This is not like, they smoked a little weed, they're addicted to caffeine and sugar. No, they're doing heroin. 95% of them just stopped.
Chemical hooks, that makes absolutely no sense.
So if you're thinking about drugs as just about a chemical hook, it makes absolutely no sense. Listen up.
But Professor Alexander began to think there might be a different story about addiction. He said, what if addiction isn't about your chemical hooks? What if addiction is about your cage? What if addiction
is about your cage? What if the addiction you're dealing with or your family members are dealing with is not the issue? What if it's just the symptom to a deeper issue? What if the way people are addicted is not just they just want to wake up and be drug addicts, but what if it's the symptom to a deeper issue that they haven't gotten to?
Looking at this, there was another professor called Peter Cohen in the Netherlands who said, maybe we shouldn't even call it addiction. Maybe we should call it bonding. Human beings have a natural and innate need to bond. And when we're happy and healthy, we'll bond and connect with each other.
It's about bonding. Interesting. When we're happy and healthy, we're bonding. Interesting.
But if you can't do that because you're traumatized or isolated or beaten down by life, you will bond with something that will give you some sense of relief. Now, that might be gambling, that might be pornography, that might be cocaine, that might be cannabis, but you will bond and connect with something because that's our nature. That's what we want as human beings. And I think, at first I found this quite a difficult thing to get my head around, but one way that helped me to think about it is, and I can see
Think about this right here for a second. This is a good thought experiment. Listen to this.
I've got over by my seat there a bottle of water, right? I'm looking at lots of you, and lots of you have bottles of water with you, right? Forget drugs, forget the drug war. Totally legally, all of those bottles of water could be bottles of vodka, right? We could all be getting drunk, I might after this.
Said I might after this.
But we're not, right? Now, because you've been able to afford the approximately a gazillion pounds that it costs to get into a TED Talk, I'm guessing you guys could afford to be drinking vodka for the next 6 months. You wouldn't end up homeless. You're not going to do that. And the reason you're not going to do that...
So, you guys catch that? He's saying, listen, everyone sitting here in your bottles could have vodka, right? I could be sitting here drinking vodka or hard liquor all the time, but we're not doing that. Why? We could afford to do that, but why?
Not because anyone's stopping you. It's because you've got bonds and connections that you want to be present for. You've got work you love. You've got people you love.
You got bonds and connections you want to be present for. You have work you love. You have people you love.
You've got healthy relationships. And a core part of addiction, I came to think, and I believe the evidence suggests, is about not being able to bear to be present in your life. Now, this has really significant...
We're speaking generalities, okay? Are there instances where someone gets overprescribed drug, opioids, whatever, and then they just become an addict by happenstance? Yes. We're speaking generalities. We're speaking on the broad spectrum of people who are dealing with addiction, that more or less addiction is the symptom, not the actual issue. Addiction is an act out that over time compounds and gets worse, not the actual issue. Okay, the issue is deeper. The issue is maybe some trauma, isolation, boredom, lack of purpose. You guys following along? So addiction is oftentimes the symptom, the act out. And there are times where people act out because they're bored and they just, I don't know, just got overprescribed and then they got addicted to it over time. But more or less, it's the symptom of something deeper. We would call sin, ultimately, scripturally speaking. It is something that's a lot of times, not all the time, again, we're speaking generalities, a lot of times is a reaction to when people sin against you, when you have trauma and then you don't know how to process and cope with the trauma. So then you are trying to medicate the trauma. You're trying to suppress the pain. You're trying to not deal with your own issues by using drugs, alcohol, sugar, food, pornography, what have you. This is a paradigm shift. The way I'd like to put it, and I think I saw this in their comments, is the opposite of addiction is not just sobriety. I want you to be sober-minded. I think the scriptures call us to be sober-minded. But the opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of addiction is connection to God, first and foremost, which is going to connect you to a greater purpose for your life, to know God and make him known, right? Connection to people in your life, your family members, the people you're helping, the people who you want to raise, your future kids, your future spouse, your spouse today, your connection to people, the people in your small group, the people in your local community, right? And so addiction isn't just, I'm just gonna wake up and be a crackhead, right? Because all of us could just wake up and be alcoholics. We could. Majority of you guys, if you're watching this on a smartphone device, you could probably wake up and afford to become an alcoholic, but you're not going to. But you're dealing with some other issues, right? And why is it? It's because there's a disconnection, either from God, a disconnection from your purpose, clarity on your purpose, a disconnection from people, disconnection from a routine, a disconnection from the ability to address your trauma and to face it head on. And so you are then suppressing the deeper issue with something that is a lot of times self-destructive, a lot of times very hurtful, right? And there's ways to also redirect these addictions into more productive things, right? And good things can become addictions as well. I think this is very profound if we just understand that, listen, addiction is not the real issue. There's other issues. So if you're dealing with addiction, you got to get to the root, not just look at the fruit. What is the root of your issue? In my life, it was sexual trauma. It was being molested as a kid. It was being in a relationship with a single mother who was also an addict. You guys see what I'm saying? And so in that, I had to first just be aware that I have some issues. Second of all, I had to understand that the way I was acting out, whether it was through food, whether it was through pornography, whatever, when I was younger, it was alcohol and weed. I had to understand that I'm just acting out because I'm lacking purpose. I'm lacking a connection to God. I'm lacking a connection to people. I'm lacking a connection with my own understanding and self-awareness of why am I the way I am? Why is this video called Christians versus Addiction? Because a lot of times Christians just want to take the default position of abstinence, not understanding that just abstinence isn't always going to fix things on a policy level. And where I'm going to go to next is going to offend you guys. I've talked about this on the channel before, and it's okay. Just buckle up for a second. All right, just buckle up because the conclusion of this is going to make some of us uncomfortable. So, I do not use drugs. I do not drink alcohol. I don't think you should drink alcohol or use drugs. That's just my personal conviction. I think, depending on what kind of drugs, like if you get Tylenol for your headache, okay, I get that. But if it becomes a pattern, I'm not for it. I don't support that. You guys have seen me even on my videos with the Crew's Hip Hop Corner, right? Talking about casual cannabis use. I'm not for it. But when it comes to how we deal with this in society, my position is different. And I'm going to get to why here in a second. Because the ramifications of us just wanting to abstain, and then holding the rest of society to it can be very problematic. I'll give you an example. Prohibition. There was once upon a time where America was against alcohol. So we prohibited alcohol, and alcohol was illegal. Guess what happened? It got worse. You could get punished for drinking it, but then it literally spawned the black market of the mafia. Our prohibition, our noble intent as good moral people, because by the way, morality and holiness aren't the same thing, but our moral intent of we're gonna black this thing out of society actually caused more harm than good. And it created an undermarket of bootleggers, of organized crime, of extortion, of more violence with police. And it was a wild time in American history under Prohibition. What I'm gonna show you guys next is most of you guys aren't gonna. I need you guys to think different about this. I'm gonna give you guys a Bible verse to tie this all together. Not the policy and where this is gonna go from a policy standpoint, but from our heart and what our heart as believers should be ultimately in terms of being connected to God and connecting others to God.
Basically said, look, we can't go on with a country where we're having ever more people becoming heroin addicts. Let's set up a panel of scientists and doctors to figure out what would genuinely solve the problem. And they set up a panel led by an amazing man called Dr. Huao Gulao to look at all this new evidence. And they came back and they said, decriminalize all drugs.
What did he say? Panels got together in a country with massive heroin issues, and they all got together, different doctors, different leaders, different experts, and they said, what? Decriminalize all drugs?
Cannabis to crack. But, and this is the crucial next step.
And this is the crucial next step. Listen.
Take all the money we used to spend on cutting addicts off, on disconnecting them, and spend it instead on reconnecting them with the society.
Take all the money that you spent trying to disconnect people from society and spend those resources reconnecting people from society. Okay, spend all those resources that you were using to punish people for addictions that were actually issues of deeper things. All that money you spent punishing people, and rework it and use it to restore people.
But the biggest thing they did was the complete opposite of what we do. A massive program of job creation for addicts and microloans for addicts to set up small businesses.
Job creation for addicts and microloans to start small businesses. Interesting.
Say you used to be a mechanic. When you're ready, they go to a garage and they'll say, if you employ this guy for a year, we'll pay half his wages. The goal was to make sure that every addict in Portugal had something to get out of bed for in the morning. And when I went and met the addicts in Portugal, it's fascinating. What they said is, as they rediscovered purpose, they rediscovered bonds and relationships with the wider society.
As they rediscovered purpose, they rediscovered, there's that word bond, there's that word connection. They rediscovered connection and bonds with the rest of society. Your purpose is connected to your bond and your connection with the rest of this whole thing in society and in the world.
15 years this year since that experiment began, And
It's been 15 years. Here are the results. Here are the results. Is it just all out anarchy there in Portugal? What do you think?
results are in. Injecting drug use is down in Portugal, according to the British Journal of Criminology, by 50%, 50%. Overdose is massively down. HIV is massively down among addicts. Addiction in every study is significantly down. One of the ways you know it's worked so well is that almost nobody in Portugal wants to go back to the old system.
Woo!
Now that's the kind of political implications. I actually think there's a layer of implications to all this research below that.
Crazy, right? I want you guys to go watch that full video when you get a second. The video is called Everything You Think You Know About Addiction Is Wrong. It's about 14 minutes. It's really good. Here's my issue. This is addressing the issue in America on the war on drugs. And if you don't know the history of the war on drugs, it's been wildly hurtful to the African American community, to the Hispanic community. There's some wild stuff that happened in the 80s with the war on drugs. It's actually being dramatized right now in a show called Snowfall, where what was pretty much admitted by the CIA is that there was an illegal war that Ronald Reagan wanted to fight against communism in South America, and he couldn't get Congress behind it. So to fund this illegal war, he started allowing cheap cocaine to flood the streets under the supervision, under the knowledge of the CIA in South Central Atlanta. This is documented. There's multiple documentaries made about this. Under the watch of the CIA, flood the streets with cheap cocaine in the middle of a bunch of people who are having trouble in a recession, get a job, find purpose, stay connected to their family. And then this whole sequence funded an illegal war in South America. The CIA was aware of it. And we had this war on drugs where then these poor black people who were using crack at the same rates that white people were using coke were sentenced at 100-to-1 ratio. At 100-to-1 ratio. Okay? This is in the 80s. This isn't that long ago. I can never find a conservative to dispel how this wasn't systemic when we're talking about racism and all this kind of stuff. Right? And so I know people personally affected by this. Petty drug crimes with crazy minimal sentences. This is wild stuff that happened. And so, and go fact check me. Go look this up. Go look this up. Go look up the story of Freeway Ricky Ross. Go look up the reporter who blew the whistle on this and somehow committed suicide by shooting himself twice in the face. How you kill yourself shooting yourself twice in the face, fam? Yeah, this is wild stuff that happened. And I am not one of those conspiracy theorists, right? Flat earther vibes, but this stuff really happened. And it's crazy that it happened right here in Southern California and the trajectory that it set a lot of these neighborhoods in, like Watts and South Central. Insane stuff. So why am I talking about the decriminalization of drugs? Because when we look at a drug like cannabis that I think you shouldn't dabble with, that I think it's very difficult to say, oh, consume it and remain sober-minded when you got guys like Joe Rogan saying, yeah, I don't think if you're under 30, you should consume cannabis. Joe Rogan saying, I don't think you should drink alcohol, right? But he consumes cannabis. When we talk about stuff like that, this is why I am for the decriminalization of drugs. This is why I've on this channel talked about the need to decriminalize cannabis, to let it be legal, because when you prohibit something, when you make something illegal, it actually makes the situation worse. And that's exactly what's happened here in America. The war on drugs is an utter failure, complete failure. And it's punished a lot of addicts that were using drugs to cope with something completely different. And it punished their behavior and never dealt with their issue, their rooted issue, which created compounds and compounds of just terrible stuff. So as a Christian, you really have to consider how your policy is shaped in these types of things. Ultimately, we as Christians are called to what? To help people reconnect back to God, right? That instead of being folks that are about punishment and being punitive and punitive justice, what if we were known by Christians being restorative and restoring people back to God? And there's this is in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 11. It says, Therefore, knowing the fear of the Lord, we persuade others, but what we are is known to God, and I hope it is also known to your conscience. We are not commending ourselves to you again, but giving you cause to boast about us, so that you may be able to answer those who boast about our outward appearance and not about what is in the heart. For if we are beside ourselves, it is for God. If we are in our right mind, it is for you. For the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died. This is the gospel, right? Jesus lives the life we couldn't live. He dies for all of humanity. He rises, right? This is incredible, right? And he died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised. Now check this out. From now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh, even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, when we regard him thus no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. All this from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the what? The ministry of reconciliation. Christ reconciled us to himself through the cross, restored us back in a right standing with him. Beautiful good news. By living the life that we couldn't live and dying to death that we should have died, right? And then what? And then he says, all this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us meaning Christians, the ministry of what? Reconciliation. We now have the ministry of reconciliation. That is ultimately what the gospel is. That is, in Christ, God was calling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, not counting your bad behavior, not counting your addictions against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation, not the message of punishment, the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ. God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. Some of you guys are watching this right now, and I implore you, please be reconciled back to God through Christ. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. He made Jesus, who was perfect, okay, who knew no sin, to become our sin, to take on the punishment of our sin on the cross, so in him we might become the righteousness of God. And then he says, now you guys have the ministry of reconciliation, not the ministry of judgment, not the ministry of wrath, not the ministry of punishment, not the ministry of anything, but the ministry of reconciliation, that God is reconciling the world back to himself. That's good news, friends. And if we're talking about reconciliation, we're talking about reconnection, reconnecting people back to God, reconnecting people back to their purpose, reconnecting people back to the family of God, reconnecting people back to community, reconnecting people back to their families. Imagine if we truly became a community of people where, you know what, before you have to behave correctly, before you got to clean up your addictions, you belong here. Before you got it all figured out on what you believe, you belong. You belong here with us. And then because you belong, you're going to believe and going to behave, and you're going to become like Jesus. See, we've gotten it backwards in the church. We've gotten it completely backwards. We said, first you got to behave, then you got to become, then somewhere down the line you could belong. You could be in. I'm telling you guys, I don't care where you are with addiction. I don't care what your issues in. You belong as a Christian. You belong giving your life to Jesus, surrendering your life to Jesus. And it's going to be messy, and you're going to have issues, and it's going to be tough. But God will change your heart. God will work it out. You do your part, God will do his part. God will give you a new heart, new desires, surround you with people, and then you will eventually become to behave. And some of those behaviors, just fully transparent, some of those behaviors take longer to get rid of than others, okay? Some things for me were right away. Boom, God just lifts stuff. Other stuff, I didn't have the tools, the resources, and it took me decades to wrestle and fight and conquer this thing of pornography. It took me decades, fam, decades. And other stuff right away. I'm trying to give you guys the tools, the resources, the mindset, so that it could be faster for you. You don't got to spend decades trying to get over it. You don't got to take the scenic route like I did. You can get there quicker. And I feel like with information, with just the way we think about these things, with understanding that addiction is just a symptom, you got to get to the root. Stop trying to address the fruit of all these issues in your life. Get to the root. This is why I advocate for counseling. This is why I advocate for therapy. Get to the root of what those issues are. Become self-aware. Figure out what those traumas are if you're dealing with addiction. And some of y'all, you grew up in a great home and you just got bored and just decided to start doing dumb stuff someday. That's probably a little different, okay? But I would bet that you feel disconnected in some regard as well. There's some disconnection. So the opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of addiction is not punishment. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Are you connected? Are you connected to God? Are you connected to your purpose? Are you connected to some type of church family or some type of believers in your life? You're connected to your normal family, right? Hopefully this stuff is helping. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments section. Is this crazy, the stuff I'm talking about? Is this wild? Ruslan, you're talking about decriminalizing drugs. Oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? They're just gonna go crazy, right? Or is there something to this with the caveat that we can be ministers of reconciliation? Let me know what y'all think. If you found this video valuable, please do give it a thumbs up. That would help a ton with the YouTube algorithm. Hit that subscribe button, 51%. We got it down from 52%, 51% aren't subscribed. So hit that subscribe button, make sure your bell notifications are on. And if you want to partner with what we're doing here, which would mean the world to me, consider joining our Patreon community. That is who we open up the calls to. Also, shout out to all the channel members. Guys, thank you so much. Peace.
Kingstream Entertainment. Ruslan.
Yeah, I need some real estate next. I've been the realest, not best. Is there a difference? I guess. Nah. Yeah, they told me God bless. I told them I wanna bless God. Yes. I told them I wanna bless God. What's that mean? What's that mean? What's that mean?